I'm the executive director of the Kentucky Student Success Collaborative, which is an arm of our Council on Post-Secondary Education. And I'm just really excited to bring this amazing panel together today to share some of the learnings that have been going on in Kentucky and some of the impact of great work. Excuse me, got this Kentucky allergy situation happening. Okay, so we are recording the webinar today, and we will also share out afterward both the PowerPoint deck, the agenda, a few other resources that I thought might be of interest to your teams. And we will go ahead and I will dive in. Okay. So we have a 1-hour webinar this morning. I'm going to give you a quick overview of the project that both Kentucky State and Northern Kentucky University participated in. And then we're going to dive into just discussing how it went, what they learned, what they did, and what's next with all of our panelists. There will definitely be time for questions from you all at the end. So as we're going along, please do write them down so that you don't forget. You can also put them in the chat. And I will try to kind of moderate that as we're going. So just a little bit about the Student Success Collaborative. We launched in October of 2021, really with the purpose of helping bring together our different partners across the state of Kentucky that have common priorities and common challenges related to helping our students get to the finish line and complete that degree or credential, helping identify and eliminate any equity gaps or institutional performance gaps that we're seeing. And then also, with that ultimate purpose of ensuring the economic mobility of Kentuckians. Our way of doing this work is really a collaborative approach, as you can probably guess from our name. We love to bring people together, share new ideas, scale what's working, kind of iterate and have this really continuous improvement approach to the work. So everything is a learning opportunity and I think really solutions oriented. When we first launched in October of 21, we had really a very, very soon after that, we had this opportunity to partner with Jobs for the Future, this national organization, on what they were calling a network demonstration project. And so we invited all of our public institutions in Kentucky to see who would be interested in joining in this process. And it was very much kind of we're not sure what's going to come of it, but it's going to be great. And so we had 9 stakeholders across the state jump on board, 2 of our public universities, Northern Kentucky and Kentucky State, and then 7 community colleges. And they went through this process together. They all had the same process, even though the projects that they chose to work on at the end of it may have differed. And this project was really made possible by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who funded the technical assistance that was provided to the campuses. So the first step in this process was to take this big assessment that's called the Institutional Transformation Assessment. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that, but it's really it's an instrument that helps you, it's a self-study. And so you can really look at some really critical areas around student success, institutional capacities, overall culture, and that assessment will really help identify where are our biggest opportunities for improvement. So there's a leadership team at each of the campuses that kind of participates in some sense-making sessions around what are we learning from this assessment and what direction do we want to go. So as they identify that priority area, then we start identifying through the help of our Jobs for the Future partner, who is a relevant technical assistance provider who might be able to help with this solution area that our campuses have identified. And that's where we were able, for this particular case, bring the ADA Center to the table and get started on delivering that technical assistance to our campus partners. So I did just want to say a little bit more about the ITA, the Institutional Transformation Assessment, because even though it is slightly a heavy lift at the beginning to take this rather large self-study, I think that it's overall an incredibly valuable opportunity and experience for campus teams. You really reflect on your existing student success efforts, and as you hopefully allow broad stakeholder engagement across your campus to participate in the survey, you can see where you may have opportunities to improve just communication around what's happening, as well as opportunities, because the results of the assessment are really based on a rubric to see what is kind of emerging best practice all the way up to exemplary best practice. And then to be able to come together with your team to create that action plan. So here are the different dimensions of the institutional transformation assessment. For both 2-year and 4-year institutions, there's a focus on guided pathways, which is really that concept of how do we help onboard our students into a program of study that's ultimately going to lead them to a rewarding career. And then, of course, there are solution areas. So some of the big pain points in higher education as we're trying to support students that come to us, and we admit them. And so that is our goal, is to help them get across that finish line. It focuses on developmental education, student services, emergency aid, which is a relatively new module that's been added, as well as digital learning. And then when you look at your operating capacities, how is policy influencing student success, state policy, institutional research, strategic finance, and information technology? So those are kind of operating capacities that are really essential ultimately to having a strong student success effort on your campus. And then if you look around the outside, that dotted ring, that's our leadership and culture. And I think that that's just really great to be able to kind of survey your campus population, your campus stakeholders around opportunities for improvement in leadership and culture. So just to dive a little deeper, because both Northern Kentucky University and Kentucky State identified information technology as an area that they really wanted to focus on. So what that module was all about was really gauging the institution's ability to provide institutional leadership, faculty, and advisors with the tools and information they need to contribute to student success and develop and monitor meaningful student success initiatives. So that was the area. And I'm going to put more of this in the follow-up, but this will just give you a sense of, like, there's about 13 questions in this module. So this is what the institution is really self-reflecting on. And you can see from the rubric all the way from emerging up to exemplary, how do you know where you are? And so this is a really great tool, and I will be sharing this, this handout with everyone. So ultimately, we came to the decision, NKU and KSU, that they wanted to focus on information technology. And through this network of providers, the ADA Center is a national provider that really does information technology audits for improving student success initiatives and eliminating equity gaps. Like, that is their area, a major area of expertise. And so they crafted a pretty focused scope of work that they would provide individual opportunity assessments for each of the campuses, really based on their individual IT platforms that they used in their individual contexts. But then that the goal was ultimately that we could learn from one another. And so that is really what we are here to talk about today, and get a good sense of where we are, what lessons have been learned that we can share even more broadly with the state and others that are interested in this area of work. So I am so excited to be able to introduce our amazing panel today, and I'm going to stop sharing screen so that we can see their beautiful faces. We have Brittany Davidson, who is a principal at the ADA Center. We have Dr. Ryan Paget, Chief Enrollment Strategist with Northern Kentucky University, Pete Rinto, Institutional Effectiveness Analyst with Northern Kentucky University, and also Dr. Wendy Dixon, the Chief Information Officer with Kentucky State University. Welcome, everybody. Okay, so I am going to just kick off some of these questions, and then there'll be plenty of time. So if you are in the audience and you have a question you would like to ask, please don't hesitate, write it in the chat, or yeah, just write it in the chat for now, and then we'll be able to get to those too. So I wanted to kick off the conversation with Brittany, and I was hoping that you could just provide a big picture overview of how information technology is both a barrier and a solution to student success. And then what was the process that you all at the ADA Center go through when you're helping an institution perform an information technology opportunity assessment?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. And I think, first of all, a big thank you to Lily and her team for pulling this all together. I know that working through the ITA and getting folks to unpack what they need is a really big job. So I have to thank you all for doing that. I'm going to share my screen. I want to make sure, can you all see? You should be able to see Ada Center in brief. Great. So thank you, Lily. Lily is letting me use some visual assistance here because I'm very much a visual learner and like to talk through things with pictures. But really quickly, the Ada Center, in addition to doing a lot of the work with the Gates Foundation and the State Success Centers, as Lily mentioned, I think one thing just to highlight is we are founded on the belief that technology is not a silver bullet to any problem. But we do believe that with the right planning and implementation, it can play a really important role for student success and equity. In addition to doing this kind of work, we also do a lot of work with other state success centers, Achieving the Dream. We'll advise the Gates Foundation on some of their tech strategy. And I think importantly for this group, we do develop a lot of open source research resources. So even if you don't have the Gates funding, I'd encourage you to go to our website and pick up some of those freebies as well. So as we go through here, you asked a little bit about what does it mean to have technology that supports student success and doesn't, right, Lily? So the way I like to talk through this is actually to talk a little bit about the history of tech in higher ed, because there is this story in the broader national conversation that very much mirrors what we see on individual campuses. So if you just bear with me for a second, if you think back to 2010, you kind of climb in our time machines and think back to when Amazon was just becoming a place where they sold more than just books. Netflix had just stopped sending out the DVDs and we're starting streaming. This is also the time when folks were getting really excited about the promise of education technology. Folks were thinking about using things like predictive analytics, like nudging. We were getting more advanced features in learning management systems. So for those of you who are curriculum developers, I heard on the line, certainly things have changed a lot since then. And I think one of the places that exemplifies the promise of what we can do for student success and equity with technology was Georgia State, right? That was one of the really big stories nationwide. For those who don't know, Georgia State purchased EAB Navigate. They worked with predictive analytics, and they were able to use that data to do essentially two things. One, they were able to triage their students a little bit more and to say, who are the students who need a little bit more support? Where do we really target our efforts, given that we only have so many resources and so many people? And two, they were able to do a lot of hypothesis testing. So they were able to say, what are the things that are working and not? What is the data saying about the actions that we're taking for student support and student success? And that was hugely successful. I think there was a headline that came out at the time that was national news about Georgia State doing the Moneyball of higher education. And folks were really excited. And so they went out and a lot of folks bought some of the same technologies that Georgia State had. And what happened? Clearly 10 years later, we have not solved all of the issues in higher ed. And so we saw in the years in the kind of the mid 2000s onward is folks getting a little bit frustrated and a little bit cynical about technology because they had spent a lot of money. They had hoped to sort of mirror what Georgia State did. But largely what we saw across the country was, sure, there were a few folks who did really well with it. And there were some people who certainly had some great results come out of their technology investments. But I'd say by and large, a lot of folks were more in the middle, where we had a few wins, but there were also a lot of folks talking about initiative fatigue. And a lot of folks saying, I don't feel like even though we had some of this progress, it doesn't seem to equal the price tag that we are paying for some of our technology. And we want to know why that is. And then on the far end, there were a few cases where things were actually kind of alarming. There were some institutions that used things like predictive analytics. There was one in particular that used that to figure out which students were struggling the most as they started at that institution and actually tried to nudge them out of the college because they were afraid that that would hurt their rankings. So all of that to say, and I will say that there has been a lot more progress since then, and certainly a lot more scrutiny on those kinds of practices, but deeply problematic and sort of evidence that technology is not necessarily all good, all bad. It's really about how it is used. And so when we think about this, we think about what makes the difference between the folks who were able to really leverage student success technology for their students, for equity, to really drive their numbers upward, and where are folks faltering a little bit. And so when we talk about this, we really think about this in this chart around what does it really mean to have a successful technology acquisition. And the thing I like to point out about this definition is that it really varies over the course of a technology lifecycle, right? So when we first acquire a tool, we're not going to see results right away. The main thing that we look for is, does it turn on, right? It's really that simple. Are the features working as expected? And then as we implement, maybe we look for things like usage. Are people using the tool correctly and ethically? Then as we look at that, if it's being used, if it's working, is it being used and working at scale? And then down the line, eventually we look for those impact metrics, right? Are we seeing students say that they're really getting a lot out of the tool? When we look at the data, particularly disaggregated data, is the tool having the impact on the populations who we really wanted to see it having that impact on? So ideally, that's what it should look like across the course of a tool implementation. And then if we zoom out, we can also think that this really applies to a tech ecosystem as well. So you can think for the function, is not only the tool working, but is our suite of tools really working well together, right? So that's what success typically looks like. But as we know, that's not always what works for student success and equity. We really see kind of three main, I'd say, like complaints or challenges in the field in our work. So we'll hear things like, the features just aren't working as we expected. So quote from a VP of Student Success, not from Kentucky, but she said, the demo showed us this beautiful student profile, but in reality, it's been really clunky. It's not showing me the analytics I thought it would. We'll also hear things along the lines of, okay, our tool is working, but we're not seeing the impact. So we've had advisors say things like, I'm not really using this. I'm not sure why they bought it for us. It doesn't have the features I really want.
Yeah.
And then the last kind of piece we hear a lot is there's been high cost. This thing isn't even implemented yet. This is a pretty tough example, but we had an associate provost tell us it's been 2 years. It's still not where it should be. The costs are adding up with each passing day, and we have so little to show for it. So while I'd say like these three things are the things that if you go to conferences, there's a lot of commiserating around one of these ideas or two of these ideas at a lot of campuses, but the underlying root causes can vary a lot. So I have a few of them here. So for example, features are not working as expected. Maybe in the vendor Q&A, we didn't ask the vendor about, how much of this demo is real and how much of it is just your marketing. Or perhaps if there were extended timelines, perhaps they didn't realize that there was a lot of data hygiene work that needed to be done before the implementation began, right? But there can be so many different reasons why implementations become challenged that there are also a lot of different solutions, right? Because there are different solutions for different reasons. And so I've been told I almost need to provide a trigger warning for this next slide. But this is what we call our student success technology missteps map that maps out, of those three challenges, what are the many categories of things that can go wrong and why. This is also something that I had a CIO once tell me. He's like, this is not a mishaps map. This is my nightmare map. I don't want to look at it. But I think it's important to look at because, there are so many, I think it's that sort of like the Tolstoy quote that's all happy families the same, but each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. It's kind of like that with tech implementations. Each one kind of has its own set of challenges and therefore needs its own set of solutions. And so kind of getting to Lily's second question, the way the ADA Center thinks about these opportunity assessments is, like I said, we've done a lot of research nationwide outside of our work with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We've talked to hundreds of student success tech team members in a lot of different states. We also do a lot of interviews with technology vendors, many of whom have been just acquiring each other in the last few years. And based on that, we've gotten to be able to unpack a little bit more about what those core issues tend to be and what solutions tend to work best with them. And so when we talk to folks, like we got the pleasure of working with Dr. Dixie and the NKU team through this process, we're able to dive in with them a little bit more deeply to figure out, based on our national research and based on what we're hearing from your team, here are some solutions that you might want to consider. So typically what this looks like for us is we do a project kickoff where we have a conversation with the leadership or some representative at the institution who has been involved in the ITA about, what are they hoping to get out of the assessment? What are the current strategic priorities? What's your history with IT? All that background foundational knowledge that we need to understand kind of what the tech ecosystem, people, processes look like at the institution. And I will say this can be kind of like the tougher part of the process, because sometimes there's leadership changes and sometimes we'll have to have this conversation more than once. But I would say, Lily and both teams in Kentucky were really great about working with us on that. The second piece that we do is we then pull several institution teams into focus groups. So anyone who's really touching technology in different ways, we like to talk to. And importantly, we try to make sure that we actually kind of kick leadership out of the room, because it's really important for us to have candid conversations with folks about what's working, what's not, and also kind of what they know and what they don't. Because it's also really important to know if you've bought a tool and nobody really knows it exists, it's important for you to know that, right? So these are a few of the different groups we typically ask to talk to. For students, we find that can be a little tougher for some institutions just on the timeline with the grant funding that we have, but certainly encourage them to bring some of their student insights into their work. And if we can't do a student interview, we pull a lot of our research from the hundreds of student interviews that we've done on various technologies ourselves. And then we end with a custom report to the institution and a presentation where we talk a little bit about potential next steps. The ADA Center likes to kind of rank a few of the options for solutions by sort of level of difficulty of implementation and level of importance to get it done. And we'll do a little bit of Q&A with the teams to see, what feels good, what feels like it might be hard. And this can vary a lot too. Sometimes when we've done these, we'll be talking specifically to leadership, like the president, the provost, who the folks we were working with on the ground were saying, they just need to hear some of this stuff from a third party. We kind of already know what's going wrong, but we want you to be able to tell them. Other times it is more to your kind of VP level folks, just to really brainstorm and talk tactics about what to do. So that I think that touches all the things that you asked me about, Lily, but that's the foundation of how we typically do a lot of this work. It was an absolute pleasure working with the Kentucky team, and I'll hand it back over to you because I'm curious to hear what they've been up to.
Thank you so much, Brittany. So I would love to turn it over to our campus partners. And my first question was about, and we can start with NKU and then go to KSU, and then we'll kind of flip back and forth. But why did you choose to pursue the information technology assessment, opportunity assessment? So what was the specific issue that you thought you were trying to address?
Sure, I'd be happy to start off there, and good morning, everybody. For us, I don't know if we would say it's necessarily an issue. We wanted to truly have the opportunity to do a full assessment of all the student success support platforms that we had on campus, because it'd be one thing where, we are a heavy EAB Navigate school. We utilize it across the entire university, not just for advising. And so for us, it was the opportunity to say, okay, if we're hearing about this other platform that a department's bringing on, it was like, wait, well, how is this kind of being folded into some of the other platforms that we have on campus? And you would step back sometimes. And when we did our assessment working with the center, we identified just student success platforms around 28. And so when we step back from that, you're like, so wait a sec, you're asking an advisor to potentially have to navigate through 28 different platforms. And so for us, that was what was really nice about the tool inventory, was to truly step back and say, okay, we have all these platforms, who's using them, how are we using them? And as Brittany had alluded to, it's like, hey, we use this platform very heavily, but we wish there was some more features that could be folded in. Or, hey, we have this platform over here that this one department needed specifically, but nobody else is using it, but it's pulling IT over here to make sure they can implement it in a successful way. And so for us to this was the opportunity for us to step back and get a holistic picture of really all the success platforms we had.
Dr. Dixie, what about Kentucky State?
Yes, good morning, everyone. I first want to say that when we first spoke with Brittany, I felt like she was reading my mind, because she had a very good understanding of the day in the life of Chief Information Officer and some of the challenges that we face when it deals with technology in relation to student success. And much like Northern Kentucky University, we had a plethora of software on campus that's used for various tools. And I'd probably say one of the bigger drivers was the fact that we would purchase items, and a lot of times they would sit on the shelf. They weren't being used. And we need to get a good understanding of what that looked like and how it was impacting our university. And then also the implementations, having a better understanding of how the software that we had, how the implementation was impacting its use. So yeah, most of it was dealing with the amount of software we had and how it was implemented and being used.
I bet that resonates with a lot of our campus partners participating in the webinar today. So I guess my next question is, as your opportunity assessments were conducted, what were some of the barriers or some of the big aha moments that you really found through the process? And Dr. Dixon, maybe we can start with you this time.
Okay. Yes. And this is something that's probably not unusual with other campuses, but when you have different departments and they go out and purchase their own software, they kind of do things their own way. And then they wanted to feed into a bigger process that it may not work exactly because they're doing things their way and the process may require it to be another. So that's one of the areas in which we found a barrier. Another thing was communication. While we thought that we were communicating the implementation plans in a often and early, it wasn't quite enough, or it wasn't to the level that many of our areas needed. So, we needed to communicate better regarding our implementations, and basically working together as a unit. Each area, as I mentioned previously, felt like they had to do it on their own when they really didn't have to.
So for NKU, I will say this in a very loving way, but when in self-reflection, and I think people understand this, to be honest, I think our barrier was ourselves. And what I mean by that was, it was like, hey, here's this bright new shiny thing. Everybody else is chasing it. We're hearing about it in the Chronicle and Inside Higher Ed. We need to do that. And we were stepping back and saying, wait a second, though, there's some key fundamental basic things that we need to do first before we go chase this thing, because what happens is you're going to chase this shiny new platform, which means the resources, since we're not really necessarily bringing on new staff and new resources to support those platforms, though they're being pulled over here, which means we're stopping some of the things that we had been working on for months, if not years. And so it just was we were bogging ourselves down unintentionally. And so what was nice was that the center, when they did the assessment, one of the key findings they had for us was that our IT project management infrastructure itself was actually really fantastic. So we have, for example, an IT policy council that really does step back every month and say, okay, here are the projects going on. How are we prioritizing? Okay, something new came on, or we need to address this. We need to reprioritize. We even have a data governance committee that sits back and actually quite literally looks at the data quality side of everything. And so, and then on top of that, our IT department has created a really robust and really unique way for, if anybody on campus is having issues with something related to IT, they can submit a ticket and it gets responded to very quickly. And so the institution from an IT perspective can sit back and say, okay, wait, we're seeing a whole bunch of issues here. We may need to reprioritize some of these things because it's affecting the way our faculty and staff can support our students. So the infrastructure itself was fantastic. But again, that barrier was, everybody, we have this new thing, or hey, we've got this idea, let's get this platform to make it work. And while theoretically it may help, if we were able to, for example, that platform you're chasing, we can actually do that in Slate. So why don't we just take a month and kind of invest into our things that we already have in place? And so now everybody's using one system rather than trying to bridge all these other platforms together. So for us, that was really eye-opening because, you think you're doing a good thing, right? Hey, we've got this new platform that's really going to impact students. And then unintentionally, we might have actually been accidentally tripping over ourselves because we could have been doing it in this other platform we already had. And so that was really eye-opening for us. And it kind of reaffirmed some of the direction in terms of trying to streamline some of this stuff internally for us.
And additionally, to Brittany's point earlier, in terms of how implementation is going with each of these, the usage and impact of it is greatly affected because folks would chase that. Here's this new thing that works for our particular unit, our particular area. Well, yes, as Ryan said, you could use something that we already have. Maybe it's not the Cadillac version for housing or for advising or whatever it might be, but it works with everybody else in the university. Also, folks, I think, tend to not realize how much work goes into those implementations and managing those, and realizing you need, I mean, I think all of us are pretty strapped for staff and have that human capital, that you need someone dedicated to in your unit, not just in IT folks, but in your unit to actually implement that and be the project manager for it on the user side, and continue to maintain that platform, making sure that data is communicating appropriately across the boards, staying up to date with whatever new updates are taking place with that system. And I think folks don't necessarily think that far down the road and how much effort goes into these things as well.
If I could piggyback off Pete, it's like we're ping-ponging back and forth here. A key example of that to what Pete said was, so when we brought on Navigate, that's a giant system itself. And as we were going through this, what we've even done just recently with that is we've identified someone on our campus whose sole job is to make sure that the rollout and the day-to-day operations, basically, like you said, Pete, a project manager for Navigate. And when we instituted that, a year or so ago, maybe even longer, the usage rate of staff and faculty on campus utilizing Navigate went up. The amount of trainings we were able to provide, because it's one thing to bring a platform on, but as you have new faculty, new staff coming in, you got to continuously train. And then even just ongoing professional development within the system. So it's great to bring on this really great platform that's ubiquitous and how we can use it across campus. But we had to put a person in place to make sure that the success continues onwards. Because again, when you see referrals go up and everything else, that's because you have to make that investment in that human capital.
And also oftentimes with that role that the person has, especially for those larger systems like Navigate, it takes a very certain type of person. It's not just we're going to say 50% of this person's job duty is managing the platform. It's not just the technical pieces. It's the keeping up to what are the new features that are available. How can we train folks on this? How can I get buy-in across campus? You have to find that person has to be able to find those champions, build those relationships. How can we take this beyond advising and involve faculty? How can we involve housing and really be a great communicator? So it takes a very special type of role and person really in that role as well to make it successful.
And I will add to that, it is very essential. That's one of the barriers here at Kentucky State University, is that we had not really chosen a dedicated resource for these implementations. We were adding these implementations on to an other responsibility that a person had. So it's very essential that you do have a dedicated resource.
That's so exciting that I'm hearing that from both of the institutions. I will say that when we hear about implementations and people taking on these tools, the number one thing that makes the difference is having that person that we've seen nationwide. So really glad to hear that you all have done that. I just wanted to double click also on one of the things that we look at in the opportunity assessments is what's going really well at the institutions. What are they really strong at? And so just wanted to nod again to the NKU system. Their infrastructure truly is exemplary. So if folks are on this call and interested in doing that, I think Ryan and Pete are truly great resources to see how that's done.
Thank you. I think you all kind of touched a little bit on some of the solutions also. Like, I'm really interested in what were the biggest recommendations that you took away from the ADA Center of, we really need to do this starting yesterday?
For us, and not to overly simplify it, but for us, when you step back and read the report, it's like, hey, we need to almost get back to basics on some of this, because technology, obviously, it's like, hey, there's all these other things we can do. So for example, we are obviously, like probably every university is assessing AI. How can we use AI in some of our day-to-day things? And that's great. And that could theoretically be the future and where we're heading. But our leadership has said, hey, we can explore AI, but we still need to step back and say, from a fundamental basis for what we do as an institution, how do we support our students? Where are the gaps? Where are the holes? What bridges do we need to build before we even chase anything else? And so that's been great, because every time we sit down and even just a basic student success meeting, anything that we're having, it's like, okay, we want to do this thing, but what are the small little things that we need to make sure are in place before we roll out something? Because from a technology standpoint, this isn't like a light switch. It's not like, hey, you're going to have this thing in place in the next week. This is an investment of time and human capital. And so if we're not even supporting students and what we think are some of the fundamental things on a day-to-day basis, how are we expecting them to engage in this high level technology? Because to get from point A to point B, that we've got to really help them understand that pathway And so that for us, that was a nice step back. It was a nice eye-opening moment to say, okay, we now know where we need to be in terms of some of these assessments before we start chasing everything.
And I'll add to that, as I spoke about earlier, is communication. You cannot over communicate when it comes to implementation. So when we know that something's been purchased and we know it's going to impact, especially the entire university, we just start with that. We start there and say, hey, this is coming, just to get everyone aware. And then as we start the implementation process, we, engage all stakeholders so that everyone's able to understand clearly what this product is and how it can be used to improve whatever service we're purchasing it for. But communication has been one of the keys that we've used from this, as well as we previously had steering committees, but everyone talks about they need one more meeting. So we kind of got away from that, but we're bringing that back on board as well, because that's important as well.
If I could really piggyback off that too, Wendy made a really great point about the communication side. For what our IT policy council also does is, let's say, I'm just gonna use this as an example. Let's say housing wants to bring on this new platform. They'll sit there and say, okay, this is obviously something they need to better function as a unit for them. But it's like, hey, as Pete had said, what else on campus could we essentially utilize this in terms of pulling this into another platform so that we're not reinventing the wheel, maybe spending additional resources? Because again, that's one other thing that somebody else or other units are going to have to learn. And so for us, that communication, again, breaking down those silos so that even if this unit over here or this division really needs this, if we've got 90% of campus already using another tool, can it be folded in so we're not having to essentially go out and retrain and everything else? So that communication and silo kind of bringing those down is key to all this.
And perhaps more importantly, we often focus on how many systems our staff are utilizing, and an advisor is going into 10 different systems to assist a student. A lot of times we don't think about what is the inverse of that actually. How many systems are the students needing to do at that point? Even though X system is going to make their life easier and more efficient for a particular office, does that mean that students are actually needing to interact with and interface with a different system and need to go find important information in a different area that they don't know exists? That's a really important thing as well, is how many systems not only are impacting the students, but are they having to interface with actually. It is really something that can be a challenge and a barrier for students as well, as they're trying to navigate what is all out there. And we can say very clearly, well, it's on the website here, but the students aren't necessarily going to each individual unit's webpage and finding that information. So the more you can consolidate that for students, the better it's going to be for them as well, obviously.
Brittany, this is a question I'm just thinking of right now, so I didn't send it in advance, but what does it look like to go through this information technology opportunity assessment from an equity lens? And so what were some of the findings or the thoughts that you all had about, oh, this could really put up an equitable barrier, an equity barrier for our students, or, for just the overall campus community?
I mean, I think that Pete kind of started to talk a little bit about that, which is that as we're buying these products, a lot of times our student voices are not necessarily included in them. So I'm really glad that Pete and the NKU team are really thinking about that, because so often we see folks get excited about the next shiny new product that's out there, and it's not entirely their fault. I mean, there are very advanced marketing operations on the ed tech side from the vendors, right? But the problem with that is more is not necessarily better when it comes to your ed tech ecosystem. And I can't emphasize that enough, because what happens is we have so many technology tools. One, as Pete alluded to, that's a lot of things for your students to learn. And we have this assumption sometimes that our students are digital natives, and therefore they should be able to understand tech really easily. But some of them aren't necessarily, one. And two, even if they understand TikTok, it doesn't mean they're going to understand the technology that you purchased for them, right? Especially if those tools are not designed in a super intuitive way. And so then what happens is, instead of the technology helping them along their student success journey, it becomes an obstacle to it, because they might be getting different types of information from different systems. They're jumping around from talking to somebody to looking online, to looking at the website, to looking at their tool, to look at their mobile app, and they're not looking at it. Right? So that can be a huge impediment to equity and to student success, because as we know, a lot of our students who who really are the most challenged by those things, the ones who maybe did not have as much access to technology before, or maybe first generation and don't really know how to navigate the college, even in its simplest terms. And so when you add in all these complexities, that makes it, those are barriers to our students, right? So I think Pete kind of hit it on the nose right there with where technology can really be a barrier to equity. And we hear that from our students all the time in our interviews with them. It is shocking how often they're like, we just want this to be simplified. And so I would say for the group here, next time you're thinking about buying a new technology system, I would absolutely say one of the best practices is getting students involved in that conversation early on, really asking them what they need, what they're looking for, what's difficult for them. And then, as things are built, making sure they're there to test it, and really thinking carefully about what you really need. Because again, I'll just know like more is not necessarily better.
Thank you. So I'm curious, we are, I don't know, maybe 8 months, or maybe in KSU's case, maybe only 4 months down the road since the report and the recommendations kind of got into your hands. So what changes have you implemented as a result of participating in the opportunity assessment? And if you have already seen impact, I would love to hear what's going on campus now.
Well, we initially started this process with our student success team. And one of the things that we're doing now is rolling it out throughout the entire campus as it relates to software. So one of the biggest things that we've taken from this is that we need to assess all of our software, not just the software that impacts the student success areas, but the administrative and faculty areas as well. So, and we've started a broader conversation, and that's been really impactful for the university, especially as it relates to our finances.
And I think for NKU, the biggest thing is we've realized we need to really look internally and focus on what we already have. Getting back to some of the basics, utilizing the systems we have to their full potential. As Ryan alluded to earlier, having someone that's dedicated towards pushing some of those broader systems that touch a lot of different areas, pushing those further, reaching the capacities that they can actually take in, and using those effectively, and really focusing on our human capital as well, on our staff, and what kind of trainings we can provide to those people, both in using the system and using the system really as a tool, not just we need to teach you this system. We need to teach you actually and professionally develop you. And then here's this thing that goes along with that can help you achieve these aims and these new skills that you've acquired actually.
Yeah, one other thing, it came from the conversations, but it was actually it ties very nicely to is an example of something that we've done just with I think it's been 8 or 10 months now, probably even shorter than that. Is for example, when a faculty or staff member needed to make a referral, it can be confusing sometimes, right? It's like, okay, do I make a referral in the Navigate system? Do I need to contact the dean of students? Is this a police issue? So like you're trying to figure that out as a staff or a faculty member. And so student affairs and academic affairs came together and said, okay, well, what if we synchronize these technologies and these platforms into one central thing? And so what we did is we created a centralized website. So rather than sending the faculty and staff to Navigate and to the dean of students, it's like you come to this website, and then you click on what you need. And then we've already then by that click, it automatically goes to the system you need. So you don't have to search for it. So it just super simplified it for faculty and staff. Again, the idea from what we've heard from the center was just combine all these things so that there's not multiple platforms. And even though they are multiple platforms, we internally went in and made it look like it's a seamless one platform. With just a couple clicks. And so that significantly has made it easier. And then the results from that, as I shared earlier, referrals are significantly up. Turnaround time is a lot quicker. So what that means, we're helping support more students in an even faster way.
Wonderful. Well, I think that my last question for the panel was about kind of like lessons learned, but what would you share with your colleagues that are also on the call, as something that was just really, really insightful that you want to make sure that other people take away from hearing about your experience?
I'll note that you tend to think as you're going through this process that you're by yourself and that you're unique in this, but you're really not. one of the things that we learned from this is that we're not alone. So there are other institutions out there who are struggling and having the same issues that we were having. So not that it was rewarding to see, but it's good to know that you have others that you can reach out to.
Us, and I promise I'm not a paid spokesman for this. This is just an honest answer. There was value in stepping back and assessing everything genuinely. It did identify some areas that we feel, yes, this is absolutely some things that we need to think about, but it also reinforced, like, for example, hey, we actually do have a very good IT project management system. That infrastructure is in place. So how do we utilize that even further? How do we capitalize on what IT has built there? So it's really nice, because then when you're moving forward with things, the leadership can say, okay, wait, before we do, we know we need to assess some of these things. We need to think a little bit differently about this. And so it introduces that into the conversation rather than just assuming that it's going to work. So that's been really nice as we've been moving forward with some strategic decisions.
And I'll say one of the things that worked really well about this particular project is the leadership we worked with itself. It's one thing to bring a report to institutions. It's another thing to see institutions actually run with some of the recommendations and to recognize what they're good at, and to double down on it. So I will say that these two teams in particular showed a lot of strength in their leadership and their ability to look honestly at what was happening. So a lot of times I think folks it can be tough to kind of pull back and look at these things. And there's a lot of work, there's a lot of hours that's been put into it. So I'd have to commend both NKU and KSU for doing it and for sticking with it and for really running with it.
Thank you. Would love to open it up. If anybody has a question, you can either come off mute and ask, you can put it in the chat, whatever works best.
And just as an FYI, I did put it in the chat a screenshot from our Help in Norris website that Ryan was referring to earlier, where it provides faculty and staff with those different avenues in one place, so they can say, all right, I have a student issue related to an emergency, actually, a financial or academic conduct issue, and it's going to get them to the appropriate platform. So just as an FYI, it's behind a login credentials on our website. So that's why I wanted to make sure that was shared with you all.
So if a campus was interested in reaching out maybe to either NKU, KSU, or even Ada Center with questions about just to explore what the process was or any other tools or tips or anything, where would you recommend that they get started with that?
We're happy to put our emails in the chat here. And if you have anything, we can direct you on our campus to that person, or if we can answer it for you, we'd be happy to do so. Yeah, we'd be happy to be the front door for you if you have questions around this.
Absolutely. I'll enter my contact information in the chat as well.
Yeah, and I can do that as well. And I'll also send along the page, the Ada Center, which has a lot of our resources and things that you can download and take a look at as well.
Thank you. Anybody have any other questions, burning questions? Okay, well, I'm going to share just one more slide just as we kind of wrap up here, just to let you know that the Kentucky Student Success Collaborative has been doing various projects with various campuses in Kentucky on different topics. This one was focused on information technology for student success. We also worked with 7 community colleges, 7 KCTCS colleges around guided pathways and early onboarding best practices. And that technical assistance was led by the Community College Research Center. We've been working on some Purpose First initiatives with Complete College America. And there's actually a brand new network demonstration project that has just kicked off. And so we have 4 more institutions that are participating in that, and they'll be going through this very similar process of doing a self-assessment and then figuring out what area of technical assistance would be most valuable for them. So please do kind of stay tuned, whether you follow CPE over LinkedIn or just get the newsletter. We do promote these webinars because it's really important that it doesn't just value or benefit the campus that participated in it, but we want to share the research, the learnings, the findings, the solutions, the things that didn't work, so that it's hopefully easier for others as they take that step as well. And in case you aren't familiar with the Impact Exchange is Kentucky's online knowledge and resource hub. And so you can go to the tinyurls.com/KY Impact Exchange. And this, this is where we post all of the recordings from different webinars or meetings that are public. We'll share the PowerPoint deck. We will share the kind of the module around information technology self-assessments in case you're interested in looking at both the questions for a self-study of your leadership team, as well as looking at what the rubric of exemplary implementation looks like. And then any other resources that our campus partners would like to share, we'll post them there. So I do hope that this was helpful to you. And if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me. My information is here, or of course, our panelists from today. All right. Well, thank you all so much. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and a great rest of the week.
I have a quick question.
Oh, yes.
Yes, the tiny URL that you sent, is that a .com?
I believe so.
Okay.
Did you try it and it didn't work?
Yes.
Okay, why? Did you start off with the www?
Yes.
I will. Okay, well, I will definitely follow up. That'll be in my follow-up email to make sure that okay, thank you so much for putting that in there, Pete.
No problem.
Pete just threw it in there also. We have it linked from our website as well, but
no problem. Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.